Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Mission Top today. Mission Top is a farmstead and a ranch. It's a place, but it's also a family. My name is Gary Nuila. It is my family, and it's also a place of ideas, and it's a place of living out those ideas, a process, if you will. And today is the start of a new week. I'm very excited for this new week. Last week was a very eventful week, both in getting out a number of live streams that I hope were beneficial, but also for the first time in years. So this is a big event, at least for me. I was able to get that video essay done that I committed to do at the beginning of the week. So that has been released. I'm sure probably most of you that are on this stream have already found it. But if you haven't, you are welcome to watch it. And I'm pleased with how it's doing so far. These types of pieces, the more video essay, shorter form pieces with more visuals, with music, with kind of, more engagement to them, I think are the kind of pieces that just overall are more digestible for people as compared to something like these live streams. And so I was glad to finally get that done and see, that it's doing fairly well, especially for the fact that it's not a extremely well-known movie on the waterfront. It's old. It's a classic, but not one that I think is super in people's consciousness. So I'm hoping to get more of these done, and along the way, be able to release things that, a little bit more in the public consciousness. Have some thoughts for Coco, for Interstellar, for the Dark series on Netflix. That's one that kind of hovers out there, and it's a little bit intimidating to conquer it all because it's a 3 season whole story. That's just very deep, very kind of dark story to delve into. But there's something about me that is drawing me to attempt that one. And so at the end of the day, I'm hoping to get these ones more that will be even more attractive to people because they're just more in people's consciousness and hopefully be good vehicles for getting out these ideas. But today, we're just going to delve into kind of a new topic. I'm hoping it's going to be a little bit shorter. I know some of you appreciate these long form, hour and a half to 2 hour streams that I'm often doing. Others of you have said, I like the content, but it's easier for me to have, if I could have it in shorter bits and pieces. And I can appreciate both of those positions, which is why in the long term here, I hope to offer both of those kinds of things to you. And today I'm hoping to delve a little bit deeper into something, but also just keep it a little bit briefer today. And in fact, even the title, I think we're not even going to be able to complete the whole title, because as I was putting this together, it just kept on accumulating. I'm realizing that I think I'm going to separate the family part of this to tomorrow. So let's dive into this. And what is the best government for the self? Because we're going to, again, take off that family portion and just focus on this question today. What is the best government for the self? And in order to begin this and kind of get to the essence of what I'm trying to get at today, I think it's going to be easiest if you start by trying to imagine yourself not as just some unified, indivisible being, like I think is the temptation day to day, and as we kind of have a culture of focusing on our individuality is the way we're kind of taught to think about ourselves. But I would encourage you to think of yourself instead as a city, okay? And any city, as we know, has need for governance to govern itself. And so I would like you to think of yourself and ask yourself, if you can see yourself as a city, what type of government then would be most appropriate for you as a city? And this gets to something that is a very powerful idea that's going to underlie much of what I have to talk about that I have talked about and will talk about in the future. And that is something that can be referred to as the fractal nature of reality. Doesn't immediately say what I mean by that just by the term, so let me explain. What I mean by that is that the world, if you start kind of paying attention to the world, has this tendency to allow you to see things at multiple layers of being, or here's a better way of saying it, as kind of patterns within patterns within patterns. And so think of it as a tree. This is a good example where, and the tree, there's kind of this example of this, if you think of what a tree is, kind of a trunk, and then it branches off into divisions and divisions. Well, that pattern kind of repeats at every level of the tree. Right there where the leaves, where the stem, the branches kind of lead to smaller stems that lead to more stems that then lead to leaves. There's kind of a repeating pattern of the tree as you go within the tree. Or you can kind of see this as, one of those, there's these kind of images where you see the image within an image within an image, a cell within a cell within a cell, a repeating pattern into kind of infinity. That is how I think the world actually lays itself out to us in many ways. And so that's all abstract. How does it lay itself out to us in many ways? Well, this very notion of the fact that I would refer to you as a city means that you yourself, instead of just being one thing, you actually contain the pattern of a city, right? So you have this pattern of a city. You could say a city has a pattern of a city. A family has a pattern of a city, and kind of even a nation or something has the same kind of pattern within it. What is that basic pattern? Well, you can say the city has a head and a body to it. You could say it has, another way of saying it is that it has a spirit kind of hovering over it and more of a physical kind of body to it. Here's some other examples of kind of fractal ways that we're fractal parts of reality. You can refer to yourself as a temple, for instance, in the sense that, again, you have a structure, you have kind of a physical structure, you have a spirit that comes and kind of dwells in you, if you will, if you know a little bit about how temples have always been seen. But then you have kind of inner parts and more inner spheres to you. You have a heart to you. And I'm not referring just to, this beating, pumping thing in you, but when we refer to the heart of someone, right, you know exactly what that means. You have a heart to you, and then you have a periphery to you. And so does a city, right? A city has a heart to it, and a city has a periphery. So you see, you are a pattern of this bigger thing, okay? And if you can start to see the world in that way, it's a very powerful idea, because if you can see, if you gain insights about how the workings of a city, for example, well, then you could take that same, because you are like a city, you can take those insights and then bring them down to your level and apply those to yourself. Or if you find some insight about yourself and the way that you govern, right, you can then apply that up a level to a family, which is just one level up of this pattern in the being. And it's the same thing, all the way up to God when you get to that level. That's why something like a holy text or the scriptures, usually the nature of any holy text in any religion is that it's trying to give you some of these patterns, right, which you can then take out of that level of being, whatever it was, because it might be talking about a city in that holy text. It might be talking about God. It might be talking about an individual. And you can take out that pattern, right, and then apply it to whatever level of being that you're trying to, that is most relevant to you at that moment. Okay, so this is a very powerful idea, and it's not exactly the way that most of us are taught to think in kind of just our regular daily way of going about our business, right? But if you can be taught to think this way, again, I would venture to say that you will gain insights that will be valuable to you in your life on how to govern yourself, for instance, and be successful in this world. At least that's been my experience with them. Okay, so let's start from this notion that we as ourselves are not just one thing, but we are more, again, if you think of yourselves like a city, you're this loose association of parts that generally answers to the address of, Gary Nuila, in my part. And think about how it's very much the same thing as the city. I mean, what is the city comprised of? It has all these different parts. It is a geography and a location, but is the city just that geography and location? No, it's all the different things that are within that geography and how many things are in there. Turns out there's infinite things. There's, if there's so many different levels you could look at it. There's particles of sand, there's plants, there's human beings, there's families, there's associations, organizations, there's different relationships between those things, the way those things join up with each other. Some organization is tied up with the beauty of a park, for instance. So there's an organization and a physical space, related to each other in that city. There are, again, just infinite parts to that city when you really dig down into it. And which part is the city and which part isn't? Well, in many ways, it's all of those things. So you operate very much the same way. You have this body, you have this physical part to you, but is your body just one thing? Well, no matter how you look at it, it's not just one thing. I mean, you can even look at it down at an atomic level, and you are not one thing. You are, billions of things, and you're not even connected. There's great space in between you. So you're this loose collection of just physical things and particles, right? But then, of course, your body is arranged in all sorts of different ways and such that it is kind of, you can see it as one thing, but then it's different parts. And we have all these names for all our different parts of our bodies, but then it's not just parts, there's systems within the body, And it's not just systems, there's processes within the body. So which of all that is you? Well, you are composed of all those different levels. But that's just the physical side of you, right? Then there's this more spiritual part of you. And if you don't like the word spiritual, well, you could just supplant it with something like psychological part of you. There's things going on inside of you that aren't exactly physical in that same way. And scientists would like to say, well, not all scientists, but many people would say, well, it's all physical down at the ground level. And certainly that's one of the assumptions of a large number of people in the world right now. But I brought up again and again that we are not able to prove that yet at this sort of level, this psychological level, certainly the level of consciousness. We can't yet explain how for our basic conscious experience arises from physical matter. And so maybe it is, maybe it's all explainable in the way that many that in the purely scientific mindset presume, but hasn't been shown yet, okay? And so at least if we just focus on our experience of things, then you'll see that you're composed, of various kinds of spirits or psychological parts of you, or you could say personalities, intelligences, I think is a pretty good word. Another way of looking at it is you're composed of the spirits of your ancestors. I like that way of looking at it because in some way, if you think about it, they make you up, right? You are composed of bits of information, patterns, if you will, of your ancestors and the ones that were able to survive and pass on that pattern. And they make you up in even in a physical way, but it comes up and manifests itself in a way that's not exactly physical, right? And so you watch yourself for a few days and you'll see, these different spirits or personalities or parts of you, take the reins from time to time in ways that you, as far as kind of your collected self, aren't exactly in control of. I myself find myself having a pretty wide range of personalities. Sometimes I can be kind of, sullen and removed in certain settings. And then sometimes, I'm the most annoying guy in the room because there's this exuberance and silliness that overtakes me, as it will, right? And it's only once you kind of realize what's happening, you're like, oh, you kind of get back control and composure of yourself and you realize, what was really driving things at that moment, right? And when you think about it in terms of the spirits of your ancestors inside of you, I mean, one very kind of humbling thing for any parent to see is in very real ways, you start seeing yourself being manifested in your children. And it's most humbling when you see like a bad attribute of yourself, you're like, oh no. Like you see your child and you're getting frustrated with them for doing something, and then you realize, wait a second, I do that the exact same thing, right? And in fact, they're like a more extreme version of this bad attribute that I had. I passed this on to them. Something of my pattern got passed on to them, and it's not just a nurture thing. I mean, you can see this children. There's so much to children that aren't just the way you've raised them. There's something inherent there in their personality, and it's humbling to see when something of you has been passed on, some pattern and part of you has made it into them. Right? Of course, your hope is that something of the good, parts of you, or the parts that you're more proud about, have made it into them as well. And of course, that often happens. But it's most humbling when you see the other side of things. And so, if you watch yourself and see and start to appreciate, all these different things that are going on inside of you, then you start to realize, I am much more like a city composed of innumerable parts, innumerable personalities, passions, right? Spirits. There's all sorts of different ways that you can conceptualize, and I'm not wedded to any one different way. The main thing is to realize that they're there. And once you start seeing yourself in that way and start paying attention to yourself more, you can kind of gain better appreciation of what you really are. For example, Jordan Peterson, he recommends, he has this recommendation he made sometime, he'll make, or I've seen in certain lectures where he said, take some time and really watch yourself and see what you're up to. Well, in very the same light, that's one invitation I would say to you is really pay attention to yourself for a day or 2 days and see how these different parts of you seem to kind of come to the fore. Sometimes they're just completely gone. You're not aware of them, but then sometimes something can come to the fore and get in control of you in a way that, your kind of conscious part of you that's trying to hold everything together is not exactly in control of, right? But then there is this part of you, this consciousness part of you that is kind of your most immediate experience of you and who you are, that seems to transcend all these other parts. And when you start paying attention to it, it's kind of a very weird experience because we are kind of trapped inside of this consciousness, right? And we know once you start paying attention, you see you have all these other parts to you, these other personalities or spirits or passions that influence you and have their part, but you're not exactly in complete connection with them. You can't just talk to them directly. At least I can't. So it's you're aware that they're there sometimes, and then sometimes you're kind of not aware of them here in this consciousness, this kind of collected space of all the other things going on with you. So when you kind of start considering how you work, it's a very strange experience to think that there's these other things going on with you, but you don't exactly have this direct experience or communication even with those things. And most of them you don't even pay attention to most of the time, right? Your different parts of you. I mean, take your toe, or let's say your calf muscle. Unless I had said those words to you, those would just be kind of oblivious. They wouldn't exist to you at the moment, right? It's only when something happens, when you're brought your attention to that kind of thing, that suddenly you're aware, oh yeah, that's a part of me, isn't it? And one experience that I thought of that kind of really pulls out the way that this works inside of you, and maybe some of you can relate to this if you also do this, was an experience of running an ultra marathon. Or I've done this several times, and I've always had this same experience that in the course, you're out there for anywhere from 8 hours to 16 hours of a day in this experience of running whatever it is, 30 miles, 50 miles. As far as kilometers, 100 kilometers, more than that, if you're thinking in kilometers. And through the course of that day, right, you experience very different parts of you that are kind of vying for control of you. You get going and everything seems just, you're kind of together. You're in your regular state of being where you're just conscious and everything's just kind of rolling the way you want to. And maybe you even get to that, you get into that runner high where sometimes how there's an elation, there's something, transcendent about the experience. But then it inevitably at some point of the day, different things will start to impose themselves on you. They'll start to protest, if you could say it right. So it may be your stomach. A lot of people really struggle in an ultra marathon to start digesting food, and your stomach may feel horrible, and it's telling you like there's something wrong. You need to pay attention to this part of, to me, your stomach, your digestive system. But then there's another part of you that says, no, sorry, I can't. I'm doing my best I can, but I've got to finish this thing. So your consciousness, side of you has an intention and what it's trying to do, and then other parts of you are vying for control and influence inside of you to get you to do different things. And oftentimes it's to stop, right? A lot of them want you to just stop already. But then again, there's another part of you that says, no, I'm not going to stop, right? And then through the part there, that's kind of almost at a physical level of physical systems and the way they're manifesting on you. But there's very spiritual things going on as well during something like an ultramarathon, where different parts of you, it's almost like you're having this conversation with one part of your personality or an intelligence inside you that's saying like, yeah, you need to stop. Here are the reasons why, right? And then another part of you is like, I can't. These are the things, these are the higher reasons that we need to keep on doing this kind of thing. And then, of course, if things get bad enough, even at that physical level, there are ways that your body can like completely overtake you. And there's a lot of people that are runners have this experience of hitting the wall, where it is just this fundamentally kind of despairing experience in them that is just overwhelming. It's one of the most terrible experiences a lot of people have in life. Maybe, I don't know, I haven't taken psychedelics, but maybe something like what some people say as a bad trip on psychedelics or something like that, where they're kind of in the very pits of hell in that moment. And then again, if things get really bad, some part of your system can even overtake your consciousness, and you can become unconscious, right? So again, I just illustrate that to say that like during the course of an ultra marathon, it is this whole city, this whole world within you, kind of trying to hold itself together, but very much in turmoil as you push it to extremes of what different parts of you want to do, if you will. So just an experience that kind of illustrates all this point. So if I've made the point of what you are or how you are like this, and you are very much like a city or a world inside of you, then what any city, any world, any kind of populace like this, you could say, needs to be governed. So then what is the best form of government to do that? And it makes me think of the movie Inside Out, right? Where kind of throughout the movie, you have this sense of there's this control center, and how are things going to get regulated between the different parts of controlling you. And, that movie worked to a degree. Everybody gets what's going on in that movie because it's sometimes it corresponds to our experience. But there was also something missing there in that movie, because there was like this control center with these different emotions that could take over. But what about it didn't have the thing that laid on top of that, right? The conscious experience of the girl was just kind of happening outside of that. And it didn't really address what there might be in terms of, an overall spirit to the whole person, or even dealing more with this level of consciousness and things like that. Anyway, it was a fine movie, but in the end, I felt like there's a lot missing as to what really is going on inside of people in terms of our attempts to govern ourselves, if you will. And so, we know that there are different forms of government, and it's useful to think over them. Because if I'm right about this fractal nature of reality, then if we can consider the different ways that things are governed in the world, and kind of we've conceptualized ways to govern them, then maybe taking from those patterns, it'd be useful to apply them to ourselves and see, which forms of these government makes the most sense for governing ourselves. And I tried to illustrate a few of them here in the thumbnail. So over here on the right, is this gentleman voting. And so we'll start out with, a democracy, which as in a good American, kind of is the first word that comes to mind, even though there's a lot of people in the United States will be like, no, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And you got to know the difference because, and there's a whole kind of debate about that thing. But let's just start with the democracy, which the basic notion that numerous elements of a society get to have a say, and kind of the majority usually wins in most democracies, right? So would that be a proper way of governing yourself? And I hope just by asking the question and thinking about it, you'd have to say, no, that probably wouldn't be the best form of government for a self, because it doesn't matter that multiple systems would want something in you. We know that oftentimes there's parts of us that very much want something, and we know that it's not the proper thing, whether it's the sexual action that we want to take in a certain context, that we have to say nope, even though it seems to be lots of me wants that. There's another part that's got to say nope, can't do that, or the chocolate cake or whatever it is. So it's certainly when the passions kind of gang up on you that sometimes is hardest. But yeah, democracy in the end doesn't work, because it doesn't seem like all these different parts of you are exactly, when combined, have wisdom, if you will. Like, in as much as they're just individual systems kind of giving you, individual systems, personalities, spirits kind of giving you their take on things. When you combine, all their takes, first of all, it's hard to do, to kind of tally up. And once you do, there's not this notion that, they will have this, the majority kind of consensus will have come up with something like wisdom. On the other hand, you could make the argument that one way to try to discern what to do in reality, what is really going on in the world, is to consult various different indicators. Okay, so here's the argument kind of that, maybe you should be thinking of something more like a democracy, because there's different ways in which we kind of perceive if something is right. We have our physical senses that tell us what's going on in the world. We have our memory of how things have played out in the past. We have kind of a way to tap into higher kind of personalities or intelligences that we've seen modeled in stories, or a relative that was influential on us. So we kind of have ability to tap into how that perception of the world, the best way to think of this is to think you have the ability to ask, what would Jesus do in this situation? And you kind of tap into how Jesus sees the world. And then from that, you have an indicator of what's really going on and what's the appropriate action to take. So which one of those, gives you the best, which one of those gives you the truest sense of what's really going on in the world? I hope you see the answer is none. No sense. It might be your feelings. You got to trust your feelings. Your feelings are leading you one way. Your senses, are playing into it. Yeah, there's kind of spiritual things going on. Which one of those is the truest way to tell what's going on in the world? The answer is none of them, right? In a sense, when multiple parts of you align to the same thing, the same indications, different parts that you can trust, again, because we have lots of passions that we can't often trust in a lot of situations. But when your higher parts, if you will, all align on the same thing, then there's a good indication that that's real, or that's the appropriate action to take. So there is something then to a process of at least consulting various different parts of the self, various different senses, if you will, in order to make proper decisions in the world. But on the whole, I still wouldn't say that that's like the form of government per se that should rule over you. So you have something like an oligarchy, and maybe that's the answer, because I just kind of indicated maybe it's a grouping of certain parts of you that should have kind of supreme control over you, and it's that. So you're gonna ignore for the most part your crotch, if you will, if you're a guy or something like that. Again, the crude ways that people represent these different parts of you. But maybe there's these other parts, your heart, your conscience, those kind of things, and you'll rely on those things to kind of be in control in an oligarchy, a small group of intelligences or individuals that have the control over everything. But then that asks the question, like, what about, this conscious level of yourself? Is there something that kind of, or your spirit as a whole, the thing that kind of overrides all of you, that does give you the ability to say, I am Gary Nuila, right? What about that? Should you just be grouping that in with the others, which would see like an oligarchy, or maybe is there something that rides above even those important parts of you, your heart, your feelings, your conscience, whatever the labels that you want to give to them. Then there's a dictatorship. Over here on the left is this notion of a dictator, which, a lot of us, I think, a lot of times kind of act like we hoped this would be the case, that you've got this will, you've got this conscience and this will, and you know what you want, and you're going to tell the rest of you through, discipline and force what to do. And so that's kind of, sometimes, we all do this. We kind of say, it doesn't matter what these other indicators are about me. This is what I want. This is what we're going to have. And the rest of you just need to fall in line, right? So that kind of notion of everything must heed the dictator, who just kind of has its own will that it's going to impose on everything else. That's a possibility. And I think we all employ that sometimes, but I hope you see that there's something lacking in that. And that's the notion of, well, how can we guarantee that dictator part of yourself, that will, or even just your conscious part of you, the thing that you think you want, how can you guarantee that that's going to be the right thing? Then we move to a republic. So this is where, yes, certain part of the United States wants to be adamant, we are a republic. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence don't have, as I understand, the word democracy in them. We're a republic, which is both seen as a rule of the people or a rule of a body of laws. Okay, so again, in a sense, you could try to do this for yourself, and again, a lot of people do. You kind of try to say, let's get all of us in one fell swoop to kind of draft something like a supreme body of laws that we all must heed no matter what we want. Something like a constitution, a basic set of laws, and you'll get people it's a good exercise, right? To ask yourself, what is most important? How should I govern myself? Write down things. What should we head towards? And what are kind of checks that I need to make on myself to make sure that the certain parts of me don't get control in moments that are not appropriate. So, it's in many ways, again, some people might try to kind of govern themselves as a republic, and when they need to know what to do, they can refer back to this original body of laws that they've given to themselves to kind of help themselves to know what to do. And of course, just like the United States Constitution, there's usually a sense that it can be amended. So maybe you amend this over time. And again, I'm not denigrating this one at all, because I see myself doing it in different ways in my own life, and even with my family, for instance. We try to do something like this, at least with like a bare like mission statement and fundamental list of values of what our family is, and we're constantly trying to remind ourselves of them so that we can guide ourselves in those moments where it becomes difficult to know what to do, and then we're updating them little by little over time through a kind of process. So again, there's something to the notion that there are you could have a republic kind of operating in governing yourself as well. But for those of you that know me, you probably already know that there's one that I'm going to arrive at. I've already pretty much laid it out there in the thumbnail, that I think the best way to conceive of yourself and the proper governance that you give yourself is the government of a kingdom. Okay, with the kingdom, the crown, ruling over this kingdom. But kind of the most important part to that is that there's this sense that even a king is looking up to something. And that's where I think this one really kind of comes together as the one that's the primary system of government, which you can bring in all the others in different ways, right? But to me, this one kind of has the best attribute, and here's why. So already, if you think of what a kingdom is, it's basically that the crown or the head, right, governs the rest of the body in the kingdom. And one reason this works for me so well is because it is kind of the most fractally simple way of applying this principle to not just myself, but other levels of the world, right? Every person has a head and a body. Every family has a head and a body. Everything in the world kind of has a spirit and a body is another way of saying to it. Not just a physical makeup, but something that actually shows it to be a thing as opposed to other things in the world. And that's what I would say is more the spiritual part of it. From Plato's perspective, it's something more like the form, behind that kind of thing. So again, you can look at it in religious ways, you can look at it in philosophical ways. There's different ways of looking at this, but everything has, spirit and a body, a head and a body. And so in yourself, it's very easy to see, of course you have a head. Even in the way that we conceive of it from a physical level, your physical head here kind of contains this part of you that you perceive of as the governing part of the rest of your body. The head. You could say the mind, although, if you just try to contain mind within, academic intelligence or just the psychological part of you, it doesn't quite grasp it, right? There's something, even from a scientific sense, in which we've learned how the brain itself is not just contained up there in your skull, but it's part of the nervous system which extends throughout your body, and your thinking takes place in these ways that are kind of full-bodied thinking. It's not something just isolated in the brain. And so, again, at the very least, most of us are comfortable with the idea that there's something to do generally with our head is the governing part of you. And so what should this government look like? Why is this the superior kind of government? Well, if you can start out by imagining, the best form of a kingdom, what it should look like, I think that helps get us in the right place to see why this, at least I think, is a superior form of government. And so that's to think of a good king. We all know that there's bad kings, and there can be tyrannical kings and weak kings and silly kings and things like that. But when we say there's a good king, we all kind of know what that means too. And so the ideal is that the good king governs over the rest of the kingdom, over the rest of this city or state or world that you have going on with you. And the best way for me, the image that pops most easily to mind of the good king is Aragorn, that I put here in the image, just because kind of across culture, most everybody will accept that Aragorn's a good king. Few people are going to fight against that. A lot of Christians would want to see Christ as the good king, and that's perfectly fine. But sometimes I like to choose the most culturally kind of expansive examples as possible. But of course, the other cool thing about a kingdom is that there's this notion that a kingdom isn't just governed by a king, is it? As part of the head, as part of the crown, there's a king and a queen. And so, again, for any of you that know me well, you'll know that that's a component of the way to see the world that has to be there if we're to see the world properly. That there's this union of the masculine and the feminine. And I love that vision of a kingdom, because that means that even within you, there's this head, this governing part, that is composed of both the king and the queen. And together it's the crown, right? So, but there's a separation there, and there's a differentiation in roles. I think I brought it up before, but yeah, like the game of chess, has it there, how, you have these two important parts there kind of governing the kingdom on the chessboard, and look how different they are in how they operate. They both have their different responsibilities and importances. And so that's kind of one way to see it. And so, you have the attributes of the masculine governing inside of you, and the masculines, as we've talked about, it's always associated with order and with kind of articulation and understanding. So it's this part of you that can see things, can articulate things, can try to put things all into order and explain things. It's your conscious, most conscious kind of ordered part of your thinking. And then you have, the feminine along there with you as part of you that I hope you realize is this vital part of you. I think most of us do, which is this less conscious part of our thinking that seems to take place kind of, again, in that kind of darker space where we don't exactly know what's going on with it. It's more mysterious as far as how it works. There's this book written called, I think it's called Thinking Fast and Slow, where it lays out very much this kind of distinction in a certain way we think. That's more this conscious, articulated way of thinking, but it lays out just how important this other less conscious way of thinking actually operates within us and is in many ways more versatile, right? And extremely powerful. And so just an example of how this works with me. Oftentimes with these, I'll be kind of getting ready for bed, trying to finally hone down what I'm going to talk about. And last night I landed on something, a note card that I had, because I have this practice of trying to have note cards on me so that whenever I have a thought, I can just write down that thought. Because I think all of us have good thoughts. It's just that we kind of just let them go. And I try to capture them, get them on note cards, and then, over the course of months, I have a big old stack. And you can start to kind of put them out and say, oh, this thought relates to this thought, and this thought relates to that thought. Anyway, I had a big old stack of cards I was going through, trying to say, what should we talk about tomorrow? And arrived on something about hierarchy. I said, okay, that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I went to bed. But in the night, something went on there in my less conscious processes. So I get up, and immediately, again, the kind of masculine part takes over, trying to order things. But suddenly there's this new possibility there. And it all started turning, kind of honing down. I realized, oh, this needs to be more about, government. It started with the family, but then I realized you can't talk about that family government without kind of first seeing it at this one level down, which is the self. And so in a very unconscious, unplanned way, this comes to be the thing. And I think it was more through the night, the way that things are broken down, that there's this different kind of thinking going on, this different kind of governance happening within you that's less conscious, that I was able to arrive to what I'm doing today, right? So just to give an example of how this works, and I bet if you think about it, you'll see, yes, there is that part. It's much more tied into the intuition, right? Which lets you know this is what you need to do. This is right. Why? You have no idea why it's right, but you know it's right. That's a more feminine kind of governance in you, right? So you can see how in that notion of a kingdom, there is, both the masculine and the feminine kind of thing. And hopefully you're seeing that right here, that if we can understand how that works in us, well, again, you can go up to the pattern of a kingdom itself in the world, if there are such things that operate still like these kingdoms, and see how a king and a queen are the head and the crown, and they govern the rest of the body of the kingdom. Okay. So anyway, that's one reason I like it, is because built into the idea of the kingdom is both the masculine and the feminine. It's kind of incomplete unless you have a king and a queen operating, and it's always kind of the goal to have them both there as operating as the crown, right? Okay, so let's think about what's the responsibility of the head or the crown in a kingdom as it relates to the rest of the body of the kingdom. And so I would say that a good king or a good crown, a good monarchy, has the responsibility to love and take care of that which is below. That's what a good king's going to do. He's going to take care of all the things that are below him. And at the end of the day, even be willing, this is where Christianity comes in, even be willing to sacrifice himself, or the monarchy sacrifice themselves to that which is below. Even to the point of physical death, but in many other ways, there's this expectation that a good monarchy, a good governing king or queen, loves what's below and is willing to sacrifice parts of themselves in the service of what lies below them. But that means that which is below also has responsibility in the kingdom, and that's why you can't just see the kingdom as the king and queen. They're not the kingdom. The kingdom, the way that it governs as a whole kind of system, must have both the head and the body of the kingdom itself. Otherwise, a king without the rest of the kingdom is nothing, right? And a body, just a body of people without a king above it that kind of holds it all together and gives an identity is also not a kingdom. So if you want to see this as a system of governance, you've got to see both the importance of both. So what's the role of the body as a whole? Well, the role of the body has responsibility to obey, and reverence in a sense that which is above. Okay, and that's the way it generally works if you think about your body as a kingdom. And so by and large, the body does obey your head as you're trying to govern, if you do the proper thing, which is to take care of your body. And what happens in the realm of the body if you're not doing your proper role of loving it, taking care of it, and being even willing to make certain sacrifices for it? Well, at a certain point, that part of the body will protest, right? If you haven't adequately taken care of, the energy needs of your body, pretty soon, grumble, 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 your stomach will start protesting inside of you and saying, hey, we're unhappy here. Things need to happen. You need to take care of us. And so you are then moved as the head to make sure that part of you is taken care of. And it works, in very much the same ways, not just at the physical level, but more at that spiritual level. If you've neglected these different attributes of yourself, even, again, I'm always coming back to things like food and sex because they're so potent experiences that we all experience for sure. So even that sexual side of yourself, if you've neglected it, if you haven't taken care of it inside of you, right, you're going to get grumblings, right? And then at a certain point, you might get a revolution, right, where it tries to take over the kingdom. And so you see how these things work, because we know that if we don't take care of certain parts of ourselves, those different parts can first protest and then revolt and take over, try to take over anyway, the rest of the kingdom. And we've all experienced how that works with the various parts of us. But it doesn't have to be just the passions. There's other spiritual parts of us that need nourishing, if you will, from above. Like, again, one thing I recommend to everyone, spiritual, religious or non-religious, is that you should be studying a holy text as part of your general life, And if you don't do that, then that more spiritual aspect of yourself is going to start starving, is going to start protesting. You're going to have problems going on you if you're not given that spiritual side of yourself its adequate nourishment, right? And so up at the head, you can see how it very naturally is this more conscious part of yourself that very naturally fits into that role of king, or king and queen, crown, monarchy of the rest of the kingdom. But here's perhaps the most important thing, that as I've learned more about kingdoms, because as here in the United States, it's a funny thing. It's like, it's not surprising when you hear about it, but it is just a funny fact that as you're growing up here in the United States, of course, you see lots of stories of kingdoms and, girls want to marry their prince or be a princess or things like that. There's something very natural about kingdoms. But at the same time, if you're here in the United States, there's also this notion of that kingdoms are bad, right? Because, of course, we threw off a kingdom and that role of government and put in place this other kind of government. So there's this notion that we kind of took a step above what was below, that kingdoms, in a sense, were inferior. And there's, that brews out there in American culture and society in ways that I think you can appreciate why. But to those of you that are kind of more comfortable still living in a kingdom, even though most have kind of have more, of course, democratic aspects today, you might find funny that the United States has that kind of, shunning or looking down upon kingdoms. But anyway, so we have that part of ourselves that it's like that. But when you properly understand how a kingdom's supposed to work, because of course we have lots of examples of how kingdoms don't work well. But when you understand what's really going on, you start to see that monarchy is not supposed to be the utmost thing in the kingdom. That in any good kingdom, there's always something above the king and queen. And that's where, this divine notion comes. Even the king and queen were put there through some sort of higher authority or ideal or something like that. So in the operation of a good kingdom, there's always got to be this overarching notion that even the king and queen have something above them. So they may be, the top of the kingdom hierarchy in a sense, but in another sense, they're just the lower part of that. They have to look to something even higher than them. And it's only when they're looking to that thing higher than them and heading towards that thing and heeding that thing. Because again, if you're lower, your responsibility is to obey, right? And reverence that which is above. It's only when the crown is looking to that higher thing that the body has reason to obey the crown, right? That's how it works. So in as much as, the crown is heeding that higher ideal, oftentimes, usually it was God, was seeing God as being above them and heeding and obeying God, then the rest of the body had reason to also submit and obey the monarchy. But if the rest of the body ever feels that the monarchy is not looking to that higher ideal, that is operating just off of their own whims and will or selfish interests, then of course there's this inherent notion that the body below doesn't have to obey the kind of the corrupt king or the corrupt monarchy. And there's something inherently that just makes sense. We understand that should be the case. But if you see yourself as a kingdom, like I'm suggesting you should, that means that if you hope that all these different things inside of you, the bodily systems, the physical part of you, the passions, the very molecules, the bacteria going on in you, if you want everything to have a hope of pulling that all together, keeping it unified and into this productive kingdom that you are, my notion is that you have to have that thing above you, right? You have to have a higher ideal. And this is exactly what, Jordan Peterson, for example, has said over and over, just in different language. You have to have this thing greater than you, this higher thing that you're heading towards. And as much as you do, you can take all those disparate parts of you and always say, look, I'm not trying to squelch you or to, turn you off or to have a fight with you. But look, there's this higher thing than us all. And I'm trying to heed it. And so we're going to try to turn all you disparate parts of us, of Gary here, and try to get it all aligned in pursuit of that higher thing. And the awesome thing is that there's something inside of us that recognizes that. All these disparate parts recognize that there are higher things. And so it's amazing how you can get parts of yourself, even, right, the sexual passions or the physical appetites and eating and all these other parts of ourselves that can easily want to take over. You can get them to relax a little bit when it's in the purpose and service of something higher than them. Okay, so I gave an example of that on the other day. There was somebody that asked, how do I get myself to stop looking at women's rear ends, right? Wanted to take the question seriously because it's a question that guys have to do, because he was saying, like, I have a problem. I want to do it again and again. And it's totally understandable that there's that part of you that it's, a passion that's tied up with wanting to do it. So you'll notice that the answer that I gave was try to say, take that passion and try to get it in the service of something even higher, which in the course of the answer was like, how about instead of just seeing the rear end of that girl, see all of her, right? See the rest of her body, her beauty, her full beauty, but even go beyond that and see, the fuller aspect of feminine beauty, and let that beauty motivate you, right? And move you to higher things. And so suddenly that passion that was focused on this one thing kind of submits to something higher, right? And that's the way it works. It's pretty incredible how things within a kingdom will submit to higher ideals. And so again, as your consciousness, this part of you that is most has the role to take care of everything else and give it that vision, right? Because that's your job, is to see what it is. What is the ideal? You've got to present the vision to everything, that is what you've got to do, is present that vision, try to find it. If you don't have it, you've got to find it, because if you don't have that higher thing than you, good luck trying to get everything to hold together, everything inside the rest of your kingdom. And if you can't do that, then what do you have? You have a kingdom in disorder. And you could frame that this is the grand problem of today, of our society. In many ways, those higher ideals that they're supposed to lie above the kingdoms, have been eviscerated. So what are people left with? These notions of self-fulfillment. What should I want? Me as the head. What will make me happy, right? What will be fun to do, and what will be pleasurable to do. These become the things that you try to hold together the kingdom with. But because inasmuch as those aren't actually higher things than you, again, good luck holding yourself together. And hence, what do we get? We get a lot of people that can't hold themselves together. You get people with disparate parts doing their own separate thing, governed by these other kind of lower parts of themselves. And we even, when it comes to people's minds and mental health and stuff, we have technical names for these kind of things. When suddenly you see all these disjointed personalities that gain control of a person, you have, technical mental disorders that can be defined as somebody that doesn't have a properly governing entity to keep all those different personalities and intelligences. So I'm talking of something like schizophrenia or some of these disorders, where people's moods or whatnot can utterly take control of them. Again, it's because there's very often happens when people can't, hold together the head, the crown, the monarchy can't hold together the disparate parts inside themselves. And I'm not trying to say that's all 100% people's fault or something like that it's all just a matter of, kind of governing, because it's more complicated than that. But I am also suggesting that, even stuff like mental health does have to do with our abilities to find a higher ideal to hold ourselves together. And I would say even everything I've ever learned about psychology and all that oftentimes teaches those exact same things of how to help people hold themselves together, right? Okay, so that's the main body of what I wanted to say. I've got just a few kind of closing comments, but I'm going to come over and see what you guys have said in the commentary to this point, and then we'll wrap it up. So thanks to my family for being on here. They're actually not here at Mission Top today, so I've got my daughter was throwing in some comments. Thanks, Corinne, for paying attention, and hopefully this was at least a little bit interesting. And welcome Wiss and Christian on here. Christian says, maybe this is me being crazy, but I've always conceptualized some of the constituent parts of me as younger versions of me, kind of stored in each other in a series like a Russian doll. Weird to write. Yeah, that's something to chew on. I mean, my initial reaction of that is like, yeah, interesting. I have to think about that, because there's some part of that has a plausibility to that. So good thought. By the way, you say, I think this topic is awesome. It's not something we ever talk about, but it's really true and important. We do have to negotiate with ourselves, pull ourselves together, and not be a tyrant. Yeah, and here's the funny thing about it is we have the language where we know we kind of have implicit language that assumes all this kind of stuff, but then we don't, in our modern way of looking at ourselves and as individuals, or just from kind of psychological perspectives or spiritual perspectives, we don't often try to bring it all together and see the grand complexity of how all these things happening. So we even have these terms like get yourself together, pull yourself together, I'm getting my act together, or these notions that are exactly this, us trying to take all these disparate parts of ourselves and unify ourselves towards something. And we know exactly what someone's trying to do when they're trying to get themselves together. But we don't oftentimes consider each other as worlds, as cities, as these complex collective, holdings together of different parts. And I think it would be good for us to have that notion of each other inside our general conceptions that we have right there on the tip of our minds, because it will help explain what's going on a lot of people a lot of the time when you find them taken over by a different part of themselves or things like that. So Landry, glad you could be on here as well, and thanks for your comment. Christian, you also say, being in a kingdom is awesome. Looking at the damage done to you guys by picking and changing your figurehead, I'll have reverence for Her Majesty over Biden and Trump anyway. Yeah, and so here, like, maybe I was trying to decide whether today or tomorrow kind of to analyze what the United States, the way that we talk about what we gained by what we did, but also what we lost. Because, maybe I'll just put out the barest minimal point that I wanted to make about that was that, the United States system, in a lot of ways, you can just conceptualize as a different kind of kingdom, because essentially it still took the same kind of governing powers and just split them up into more people, right? And in as much as it does that, and they kind of make it so that, when things go wrong, it's especially was designed to help things not go wrong when some part wants to take over the rest, right? Or some faction of society, because the United States from its very beginning was this mishmash of cultures and peoples, right? So it has a certain sense, but again, it's one way of seeing that it was just a different kind of kingdom. But it goes back to this fundamental point that it only works, especially a system like the United States, if there's something kind of up and above the entire kingdom that gives the people reason to be one thing, to be a unified thing. And so at different parts of our history, that's both been challenged, like in the Civil War, right, where very much the country was saying we're not one thing, trying to pull itself apart, or something like World War II, where very much the whole country unifies into and says, yes, we are the same thing, and we have these ideals and what we stand for. There's stuff that stands above our different kind of kingdom that we have, and we are, one together. But when you lose those kinds of notions, a lot of people would say, well, it was supposed to be God. On our coins, it still says, in God we trust. The people were Christian people. They were supposed to have that. And, you can make that argument. But in as much as that's certainly been lost to a large degree, and there hasn't been some great overlying ideal or principle that's put there ahead, no wonder that the United States, especially since World War II, has just been one sort of kind of fractious part of it, trying to gain control over the other fractious parts of it, ad nauseum, with, like you say, just different figureheads with different personalities getting put in over and over. And it's been extremely difficult since, I would say, World War II to have some notion of what lies above of the entire country. And there's been little moments of success, figureheads like, a lot of people would point to Reagan was just at that moment a good kind of communicator, unifier of some sort of ideal that could be held together. That was really the feel when I was growing up in grade school, was this notion of like the United States as this, shining light on the hill, this great thing to the rest of the world. But that didn't hold, right? And so today you see it's just one thing after another of this incredibly incredible plurality of a society that is constantly striving for a thing that they are trying to put out there as above them, which isn't. So there you got me going for 5 minutes. I was supposed to say that in 30 seconds, so my apologies. But anyway, yeah, it gets to the point of how that's where the United States is definitely different and has its problems, but I think it's best conceptualized as just kind of a different kind of kingdom. And maybe I'll make a whole nother video on making that argument of why that's the case. Okay. Second, Andres. Hi, Landry. So that's a new person on here. Glad you're in here. Glad you guys are talking with each other. So Stefan, hi Gary, very interesting topic. I like the examples you gave over governance, systems of governance and responsibility, governing our own kingdom. Great advice regarding always having a religious, spiritual text to study, any that you recommend, and any recommendations about how to approach this type of exercise. So, the one easy example, if you live in in Western society, right? Anywhere from Eastern Europe over to the end of California, it still is the case that the fundamental text that underlies society is the Bible, right? And so for a lot of people that's hard. They don't see value in the Bible, and I was one of those, right? There's a lot of ways in which the Bible didn't interest me in a lot of ways, because the Bible is presented to me, as it is with most people, as being this kind of historical text, and that's its primary value, is to show you like things that happened from a historical perspective, and you're supposed to believe in them. And then you get in it and you're like, these are very weird stories, very hard for me to believe in that sense today. And so I would still find value out of it. I still knew it had a spiritual essence to it. But it's really when you start seeing the Bible in the way that I've been talking about today, of seeing patterns and fractal patterns of reality in the Bible, that it really, that's its greatest asset, is that you look at these stories and you try to discern the patterns within them and the overall structure within the Bible. And my favorite person that brings this out is Jonathan Pageau. But this is what Jordan Peterson did for a lot of people with the Bible. I would start with his biblical lecture series if you don't already have an appreciation of the Bible, because this is what he did to it. And like when he first started giving that's where I was like, like this is all in there. Yes, this is what I needed to see. And then you find that there's whole religious traditions that are very good at seeing these types of structures of meaning, patterns of meaning within the Bible, and that how the Bible, in this weird sense, is this plurality of books just all kind of brought together, and somehow overarching above it, there actually is a structure and a narrative to it that comes out of it, because the whole attempt the whole time was to get you in touch with what's going on in reality, right? In this fractal nature, show you ways, little patterns that you then can take out, look at reality and see, yes, I see that pattern going on. And so the Bible itself has this overall structure. So if you do that, you understand Western society so much better as a fundamental thing. And so I have to say that as the first thing, but I've also found a lot of value in Buddhist texts. I don't have the specific ones I've studied, with some classes in undergrad that I took on Buddhism, where I loved the text that we were studying in that. The Tao Te Ching is a wonderful text as well that I would highly recommend. And so if you just just ask the question, like, what are the texts that have had the most impact on huge swaths of society? Those are the texts to look at. I'm sure the Quran is even like this as well, in as much as it's given a structure of meaning to millions and millions of people. It has to have something in there that puts you in touch with reality. I have not read it yet, but I'm, a lot of people that kind of, again, since a lot of us are Christians, even culturally, even if you don't believe, in the religion, have this sense of kind of a animosity, you could say, towards Muslims. A lot of people wouldn't think that would be a primary thing. And again, I haven't yet read it, but I want to, So I would say any of these fundamental texts that millions or billions of people see as helping put them in touch with reality, I think you can't go wrong with any of those. Okay. And that was Sebastian that had asked that. So Stefan, the notion of higher virtue that you touch on upon is essential. Can we say that individuals that do not have any higher value rule become slaves of their ego and consumption pleasure? Yeah, something has to govern, right? And so I think a lot of with us, it kind of becomes a kingdom where the monarchy sees itself as the highest virtue. And if they're the highest virtue, then it turns more towards that level of dictatorship, where whatever they want, whatever they will, that's the right thing. And that's why so many kingdoms and governing bodies have gone wrong, because that's where they end up, instead of looking to that higher thing. So yeah, very good point. Second, Andres, Gary, I was the one who told you should grow a mustache like that a while ago. Yeah, thank you. You gave me a little nudge, and I was like, oh yeah, try it out, and lo and behold, it's stayed around. Stefan, this then spills into bigger society. Observation, what we see in societies all over today. It's a big one. But do you know how they can be made aware again of that higher value and seek it? I know what's impacted me the most has been this kind of movement of people. The reason I'm trying to talk about this in the way that I am is because I think it's the way that can transcend over religions and kind of different takes on religion. That's why you see such a wide swath of different kinds of people kind of finding interest in the figures that I've mentioned so much, whether it's John Vervaeke, Jonathan Pageau, Jordan Hall, Jordan Peterson. It's these people that are finding a different way of talking about things that isn't so dogmatic and tied into a certain tradition. Even my religious tradition that I mention a lot, has a language, right? And a way of talking about things that just does not make sense to the rest of the world. You have to get immersed in the language and know how to translate all the terms to kind of understand how the Latter-day Saint people see the world, and that it's actually not that different from, most of the rest of Christianity in a lot of ways. We just have different terms, different concepts, so we sound very different, and it's actually not that much the case. Even though, I like my tradition, I'm proud of it in many ways, but that's one of our problems, is that we're even an evangelizing tradition that wants to spread, our faith, but we do so in such kind of locked in language and don't know how to translate the terms, which is kind of what I like to try to do, that a lot of people just tune out and don't even give it a chance. Well, in a broader sense, that's been Christianity's problem. Certainly here in America, there's certain kinds of Christianity that have certain ways of talking about things, and they don't know how to broach over the top of it. And certainly not from Christianity to the other main religions, to Buddhism, to Muslim. And so it's a big. What I like about all this is that's how you get to this higher ideal, without trying to tell everybody either that they have to join some new entity or leave their tradition. Again, that's something I reiterate a lot. I want to try to encourage people to go back to their traditions, to go deeper into their traditions if they're already something alive for them, because that's what these things have done for me. But at the same time, there's still, in some way, kind of in that process, there arises this way of bringing us all to something that is higher above us. And I think still the best word is God. That is still the best conception, but we don't try to nail it down to the specific attributes that so many people do that fracture everybody's notion of what God is. And then there's those that say, well, I don't want to believe it all in a certain type of God. But if and that's where maybe the best thing would be to go back to kind of the something you see there with the ancient Greece philosophers, which is this notion of the good, which in a lot of ways is like God, but it's just not trying to get so dogmatic about things, you could say. So I think that's the general notion. We get good at talking over the top of all these different traditions and things, and in the process try to say, look, there is something up there higher, something that we can all get behind without having to abandon our particular, attempts at articulating what it is. And that's where you get there. There's certain things that almost all humanity agrees on now these days, such as basic ways that we treat each other, basic, these are the human rights and things like that. There are higher things that we can all pretty much agree on, and they lie in this notion of something, a higher ideal, that maybe something of that higher ideal is found within humanity. It's those types of notions that I think could still serve as this higher ideal for a country. So I would call it God, the good, etc., and try to communicate to atheists that this probably isn't the God that you think you're not believing in terms of the bearded guy in the sky, in the clouds kind of God that they usually is the one that they're not trying to agree in. Anyway, I kind of feel like I'm rambling on that one, but I hope you got at least something of a gist of a possibility I see in that. Okay, so let me wrap things up. and lead us into what will be tomorrow's episode, which is what is the proper government for a family. Okay, and that's just to see that. Okay, let's go farther with this fractal nature. If you see that you are a kingdom or a city or something very much like a whole world in and of yourself, one of the incredible things about life is that once you realize, okay, so you have all these different intelligences inside of you that are forming up into this intelligence that holds together, Gary. Well, what's incredible is that you can see how you live still in this world of other infinite amounts of intelligences. And there are ways for you to join yourself in with those other intelligences to form even greater beings. Okay? And so, and then even crazier than that, these groups of intelligences can join together in a way that actually births, gives rise to a new intelligence. And so, of course, I'm talking about it at the most basic level, something like marriage and procreation, children and a family. And so if you can kind of conceptualize it like marriage is something like two cities, two peoples, even like in a geographic sense, saying, hey, we're now going to be one person. And they can even kind of still maintain their basic geographical separation. Maybe they're kind of close to each other. They're still kind of two separate entities, but they're also saying, but now we're one person too. And so we join in all these endless intelligences down below the level of, these two different peoples. And then we say, we're going to group that all into an even greater intelligence and call it, the Gary and Sarah Nuila family, right? And again, it can even give birth to new peoples that can arise out of that. And I think that's the way to see it. And when you consider that can happen at the level of cities and peoples, but it can also happen at the level of you. I mean, it's just, that's what I love about the fractal nature of reality. There are these incredible things happening at all these different nature parts of reality. And so, what then government is appropriate at these different levels, at the level of a marriage, at the level of a family. You probably already know what I'm going to arrive at, but it's worth discussing tomorrow, the dynamics that arise that I've had to face up to in trying to have a family governance and make that work. And is it going to be the same when my children are children and when they grow up and they add in, there come in different people into this mix if they get married and stuff, and yet we still try to hold together this being of a family. One kind of final way to look at this that kind of just wraps it up into terms of what we're trying to do as a family is, we've always tried to, or not always, but in recent years, trying to conceive of ourselves as one being in this way, as a family. And imperfectly, it's very difficult to do, of course. But then our whole notion of coming here to Mission Top was this way of expanding that being. And you can see that, what is Mission Top? That's why I always lead with this, because we kind of have to go over the different things that it is. But it is our family having kind of joined itself to a specific place. And now there's this Mission Top being. And it's not just a piece of land. And it's not just our family, but it's like the land, the family, the plants, the animals, some of which are now here and kind of part of this living being now, some which come and go, in terms of the wildlife. It's the different way that all these things start interacting, with each other. And like when you're here in kind of the forested parts with wildlife and things, you kind of see, hey, I'm part of this greater thing now, which is Mission Top. And so I put that out there just to lay out how I don't know, mind expanding, wonderful, I guess you could say, is the reality of human life, that we can do this, right? That we have this ability to grow, to combine with other beings, as it were, and take part as humans in growing these beings and forming them and whatnot, and being part of them. It is definitely something worth thinking about it. And usually within this process are kind of the most meaningful parts of life. So I'm not going to end with that vision, but tomorrow, again, we're going to be going into the specifics of how this all applies at the next level up, which is the level of a family. Okay, I'm going to check. So that's all I had to say for today. Kind of give you a preview of tomorrow. I'm going to check, see if anything else you've commented. So we have Aman Haq. 1, the self; 2, the people; 3, the nation state; 4, a higher power. And yeah, I'm glad you're seeing how this scales up, and that at every level it works the same, right? There's a kingdom at one level. There's a kingdom at another level. There's a kingdom at another level. And then you have to see how all the different parts fall into a hierarchy in these kingdoms. Different things always, and at every level, there's always something that you have to look up to, and then there's always responsibilities below you. And so that's, again, getting to this fractal nature reality that we started out with, that can become such a powerful way of looking at life. Christian says, people ask Jordan Peterson about this a lot, but do you think the element of talking over the top about God or the good loses some of the transcendence and power of the belief? It could, right? I definitely see that as a danger, that in trying to get to the things that everybody agrees on, as it will, you end up not saying much at all. And so that's why I think the best way to approach it is to still push for the notion that there is a God or a good, and then talk about it as richly as you can. Try to understand God, relate to God, manifest God. I mean, that's really the best way to do it. Is, within religions, there's usually this notion of kind of joining, participating with God, if you will, and that's really the best way to manifest it. But at the end of the day, giving other people the space to do the same thing, and to be at different places, and to have different languages for it, and different concepts for it, right? So my hope would be like that even at the end of the day, like somebody that still identifies as an atheist because they just don't like the word God or something, sees that there is something higher, and they can appreciate everybody else calling it God, and not be, saying, oh, we've got a great division here, such that we couldn't, in a course of a nation or something, still say that, God is above us, or the good is above us. So again, kind of trying to sum that all up, I do think, we shouldn't try to like kind of dilute it to the point that everybody can agree, but more talk about it and participate it in God as richly as we can, but then try to do it in a way that leaves the space so that there's not a conflict about it, if you will, right? If that's helpful at all, so that you preserve the richness and the complexity of what God could be. And then, my attitude is try to learn from the different ways people are talking about God. Take what's good, be okay just not, leaving out what's not, what you deem not. And so, okay, I think we've exhausted this topic today. Very engaging. Thank you for all your comments and for being here. We'll be back tomorrow at 11, and hope to see you then.